Time War rages on, as in today's Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review, I'm going to be taking a look at the latest box set release as a part of the 8th Doctor Time War series, starring Paul McGann as the Doctor, alongside Raki Thakra as Bliss, the 8th Doctor's companion. Now, before I even get into the actual box set itself, if you have been a listener of this series since its very beginning in 2017, I recommend going back and listening to both Series 1 and 2 before actually delving into the third series of Time War Adventures. It's something of which that I did before the release of this box set, and I am incredibly happy that I did do that, because this box set does have a few harkbacks and references to those previous series, but also at the same time it will just make your listening experience a little bit more beneficial and the storytelling a little bit more effective. It's something of which that previously I've not really took note of course, with the other 8th Doctor adventure series, such as say Ravenous or Doom Coalition. We are so used to those box sets coming around at least twice a year, so around every single 6 months, and these stories themselves normally are still quite fresh in your mind when the next box set still comes around. Due to the 8th Doctor Time War series being an annual one, it does of course provide 6 whole months additional of waiting for that next box set, meaning that you can forget some of the key elements that have been established in the previous set. So yeah, I certainly recommend, before starting Time War 3, going back and taking a look at the previous 2 series, and that piece of advice certainly counts for new listeners as well that wish to listen to this series for the first ever time. Start at the very beginning and work your way through. So first off, and as always, in the description below, I will of course leave the link to go and buy this release from the Big Finish website. The box set itself is currently at the pre-order price of around £23, and of course this will go up in price to, I do believe, around £40 at the end of October 2019. So if you are either interested by what I say throughout this review, or if you are a keen collector of this series, I recommend buying this box set prior to October in order to save a little bit of money. And naturally, if you are also interested by what I say throughout this review, the Big Finish website does of course also contain the trailer, the story details, as well as the casting information. But as I have just mentioned, the Time War series is a little bit different to those other 8th Doctor adventures, especially compared to that of the 8th Doctor from the early days of his era. Of course, this is a Doctor that is suffering within the events of the Time War. He is refusing to fight, and of course the Time Lords are trying to coax him round to be a part of the Time War itself. We see a much darker side to the 8th Doctor, certainly a lot more ripped apart version of the 8th Doctor that has been visually damaged by the war itself. Of course, this box set is in the usual format of being separated out into 4 singular adventures in 4 separate locations. However, due to it being a part of the Time War series, there is that overarching theme of the Time War itself intertwined throughout. State of Bliss, written by Matt Fitton. This episode is a story that quite a few listeners, including myself, have been waiting for since Series 1, the origin story for the companion Bliss. However, due to it being the Time War, Fitton has ensured that this isn't your regular style origin episode. Returning to Daralobia, we get to see Bliss prior to the events of Starship Theseus, building on her personality and life as a whole. Having an origin story in the third box set within a series is kind of only something that Doctor Who could do, and I think that it is certainly a risky choice. Of course, within the previous box sets, we've got used to almost this mystery surrounding Bliss as a character, and some people may have thought that she was going to be a villain or something like that. However, this box set takes a much different approach, and something of which that I was not necessarily expecting. Of course, it is a brilliant opportunity to also delve into Bliss's past, something of which that I personally think has been very much needed within the previous box sets, because having re-listened to the other stories, I got the impression of Bliss as a character that she was a little bit of a cardboard cutout around the edges. Of course, being damaged from the Time War, she doesn't really know where she has came from or where she is going. She's kind of this character that lacks in an actual backstory, not because she's flawed as a character herself, but because she's within the Time War, and that does certainly make for an interesting character. However, what is more interesting is that after the State of Bliss as a story, I start to see a relationship that has been developed in the further 3 adventures within this set, simply down to what has been established within this opening story. The relationship between the 8th Doctor and Bliss seems to be a little bit more stronger within the next few episodes, and I think that that is solely down to this episode as a whole. So I do highly praise Matt Fitton for actually giving Bliss more character, Raki Thakra as well, giving Bliss that emotion and that personal side that we haven't previously seen in the other adventures. To this story being focused around the early life of Bliss, we do get to meet two of her friends from her childhood. This includes the character as played by Angela Mahidra, who did of course also play Rani within the Sarah Jane Adventures, and she is called Kala. And we do of course also meet another male character called Ryle, as played by John Segal. And I think that both of them are in fact rather well padded out characters. I think that we certainly got to know them a little bit more throughout the runtime, and I think that the bond of all three of them certainly worked very well. You got that suggestion of a uni-style relationship of living in a flat together, all on the same subject, and kind of all doing group work together and helping each other out. And that is something of which that is utilised throughout the different timelines that we see throughout the story. But the character that stood out to me the most was in fact Bliss, which certainly says something, considering that I've not really connected with her in the previous box sets. It is of course also lovely to see a return to Daralobia. Of course that planet was previously used in the opening story to the Time War series, Series 2, where we've seen the Daleks actually invade the planet along with the Time Lords as well, and the Time War was in fact directly affecting the planet of Daralobia. And between the two stories we get to see literally the polar opposite of these two different versions of the planet. We get to see a prior to Time War version of Daralobia, then in the previous box set we see that ripped apart version of the planet. And I think that once again that does give Bliss as a character more of a life story. We get to see where that she came from, but also at the same time it's interesting to see how the Time Lords and the Daleks have completely destroyed her planet. Nina Wadia also does a very good job portraying the character of Deepa, who is kind of your professor-style uni teacher or lecturer, who is basically guiding these students through their intergalactic university life. And a rather strong story to start the box set does once again open a few questions, and we get to see some excellent performances from Raki Thakra especially. So I'm certainly glad that Matt Fitton has wrote this story, as it made me think twice about Bliss as a person and actually get me to like her a little bit more. The Famished Lands, written by Lisa McMullen. What a story! Naturally, I'm a fan of dark and gritty Doctor Who stories that hit home the effects of what would be the truth had Doctor Who been reality. Lisa has completely avoided the conflict and war zones of the Time War, taking the Doctor and Bliss to the Vale of Ichthyius, presenting how Time War events have disrupted the shipping of food and resources to the planet below, leading to mass famine. I imagine that this story may not be some people's cup of tea, but I absolutely loved it. I'm aware that The Famished Lands is going to be one of those stories where, regardless of what I say about it, I'm going to come across a really bleak and depressing person that quite frankly just likes to watch people suffer. However, in Doctor Who terms, that does make for a very good and intriguing plot for a story, especially when you have the circumstances of the Time War. And I think that The Famished Lands, as written by Lisa McMullen, is a perfect example of that. We get to see the Doctor and Bliss travel to this planet that has been completely demolished by the Time War, not because the Daleks have invaded, not because the Time Lords have interfered, but because of the Time War itself going on in probably another galaxy, light years away. However, because of those events, that has stopped ships coming to the planet, stopped shipping food to the people, and therefore the population of the planet are starving. And the way that Lisa McMullen writes the characters makes them seem incredibly helpless. They are just zombies walking around these streets, being completely disregarded and given up on hope, and the entire story is oddly incredibly depressing, but Lisa McMullen's way of writing also gives it a very humorous side as well. There is this brilliant moment within the later half where you have Bliss with this person that is virtually starving, and then you hop to a scene with the Doctor where he is having the time of his life. He's in this factory having a little dance with these green monkey things, and he is absolutely loving it. And I think that the way Lisa writes it makes the story have an equal balance between the very bleak and very depressing of famine theme, and then you also have on top of that a slight humour that is added over the top to make the story not feel completely depressing, but the overarching message of the episode itself is bleak, is dark, is rather gruesome, but also a brilliant way to write a Time War story. This episode reminded me of something, but I don't quite know what, because there is this moment in the episode where all of the food has been replaced by this scientifically augmented gunk, which is basically meant to be ate by the population in order for them to not feel hungry, and it is meant to fill them up, keep them alive. However, it's not necessarily doing that. It is keeping them alive, it is keeping them sustained, however, the people still feel hungry. Weight is still being drained off their body, therefore the planet itself is still virtually going through this famine, and the whole idea of the food itself, or the gunk at least, is incredibly intriguing, because Lisa intertwines a psychic element within the story itself, where as soon as you've taken one spoonful, that plate of gunk in fact turns into a luxurious, beautiful looking meal that your mind has just conjured up. And the Doctor throughout this story notices this. I think that this is the episode where he really gets to see what the Time War is doing to other populations and other planets that are essentially helpless, and I think that this is possibly one of the many turning points of the 8th Doctor, where he is really starting to see the Time Lords as a horrible, nasty species that quite frankly need to be dealt with, and more than often he is now disconnecting himself from the Gallifreyans. We are also introduced to a character called Arwen, who is played by Natalie Gumede, and I think that she does a very good job. Once again, you get to know her throughout the duration fairly well in order to understand her as an actual character, and you get this sense of evilness within her character to start with. How could she make the entirety of her planet suffer by creating this gunk that admittedly isn't helping them whatsoever, and is arguably just making the situation worse? However, in the later half, it kind of turns on its head, and you get to see a different side, a different perspective that kind of makes you sympathise with her a little bit. However, the Doctor is kind of having none of it, and you start to see the darker sides of his character coming through, where he just wants to be blunt, he just wants to get the situation over with, and he just wants to show this character up for the flaws that she has, and he does this in a rather interesting and harsh way that, once again, it was great to see Paul McGann actually delving into a more darker 8th Doctor. There's edging ever so closer to being the War Doctor incarnation. Fugitive in Time, written by Roland Moore. The style of this adventure is similar to a traditional Doctor Who story, however once again with the added twist of the Time War taking control. After the Time Lords have previously wiped out the last of the hellixara, the Doctor, Bliss and the now newly regenerated Major Tamazan track down the last of the species that escaped deletion. To me, this episode once again features an underlying tone of avoiding the Time War fight, but also the Doctor seeing the similarities between the Daleks and the Time Lords' actions. We have Daleks in this one. It seems very unusual because the previous box sets have been very much Dalek Gallifrey just constantly. However, the previous two episodes in this set have had absolutely no Daleks at all, and instead we've managed to go to different areas of the Time War and utilise those and show how different planets have been affected and how Bliss has been affected personally. And more than anything, I respect Time War 3 for doing that. It has gone into new areas and new depths and actually done something different with the Time War perspective, because admittedly 4 whole box sets of just Gallifrey Time War will be incredibly annoying, and it will get old very quickly because there's only so many battle sequences that you can take before the impact has gone. And I think that the previous 2 box sets have done a very good job, especially Time War 2, of utilising the Daleks and doing different things with them. Of course we will see probably more of them within Gallifrey 4. However, this story does see the return of the Daleks, in particular the Dalek Time Strategist, but in a way that once again doesn't make them the forefront. We get to see the Doctor, Bliss and Tamazan go to the planet of Felion on a little bit of a Gallifreyan field trip where she's asked the Doctor to help out, and he kind of obliges considering that it is not near the front of the Time War and he doesn't need to get involved directly within a battle. And the Daleks kind of survey over things and look over to see what is going on, and then at the end of the story naturally they are a little bit more involved. But for the most part it is still a unique episode that doesn't particularly have too much Gallifreyan and Time Lord and Dalek battle sequences, which I do appreciate. Wendy Craig portrays the character of Shonath, who is basically the last of her species, called the hellixara. And in the actual episode itself, I think that Wendy Craig does a very good job with what she has been given, and I think that for the runtime it may have been nice to maybe see a little bit more about the hellixara as an actual species. I listened to this episode twice, along with in fact the entirety of this box set, thinking that I'd missed something from the early half that maybe referenced her species a little bit further, but I just felt like the hellixara was maybe a little bit of a 2D kind of creation. I kind of felt like they needed a bit more added to them to make them a bit more three-dimensional in their approach, because I didn't really feel like I knew the hellixara as a species. I didn't really get what they were, just got that the Time Lords deleted them previously many years ago, and this one is the last one. So I think that maybe more than the cultural kind of medieval stuff that we've seen throughout the story, it would have been nice to see that reduced a little bit, as much as I loved it, and maybe replaced with a little bit of a hellixara backstory, maybe using a few flashbacks or something like that, just to show the hellixara before they were wiped out and maybe the powers that they had. We did see a little glimpse of that, however I would have liked to see more, just to make the story slightly more interesting. But that said, the main character for me that I would like to talk about in this episode is Adele Anderson as Tamazan. Now, Major Tamazan has been a recurring character within the previous series. We've so far seen 2 different incarnations and a third within this box set, which is solely by chance, simply because the actress who played her in the previous series is doing something in America at the minute for HBO, therefore they needed to draft somebody else in to be another incarnation, and Adele Anderson does take her in another approach, I think. Her character seems a lot more like a companion to the Doctor, however is still loyal to the Gallifreyan cause, which makes her a rather interesting character once again. She kind of has a few moments with Bliss where she gets along with her, but also at the same time it is very obvious that they have differences. Likewise, Paul McGann in this episode is also incredible. I will go to that length to actually say he's incredible. This story for me portrayed something within Paul McGann, really presented how far he has came from Doctor Who the movie. We've gone from this character that started off in the movie, then travelling with Charlie, then meeting Lucy Miller, then having Dark Eyes with Liv Chenka, and then Doom Coalition and Ravenous, and all these many different adventures going to all of these different planets, and now we get to see the 8th Doctor on the end of his tether, virtually being tortured on a medieval table. That Paul McGann brings something to the role, has so much emotion and depth that we sadly didn't really get to see on TV, but I think that Big Finish have done an amazing job with his character, and we are very lucky to have a character and Doctor like Paul McGann within the Doctor Who universe. There is many different little moments I just absolutely adored with him in this story, and I think that is also down to Roland Moore's writing. I think that he brought some emotion to the script, but also once again continued that theme of the Doctor refusing to fight, as well as the Doctor acknowledging those similarities between the Daleks and the Time Lords, and sometimes they are kind of the same. I think there's this brilliant quote within the very end of the episode where the Doctor says there are good and bad Time Lords, but they are only bad Daleks, and I think that that is him trying to claw onto his last bit of hope that maybe the Gallifreyans do have some good in them deep down, but he doesn't quite know where. It's kind of this emotional Doctor once again coming to the end, which is a shame, but he's had a good run, let's say that. At this point in the box set, I was possibly hoping to see a bit more action, I must admit. I was kind of thinking the first 2 will be the experimental, different going off and doing things episodes, and then the latter 2 would kind of be the traditional Doctor, Gallifreyan, Dalek story. And it's not necessarily that. I think that this story has some very interesting and traditional Doctor Who elements, however it doesn't really sit as much within the Time War kind of theme. It's a nice episode, however I think for those of you that crave action-packed Doctor Who stories, this one may not be for you. That said, adversely, if you are a fan of character stories, then Roland Moore has done a very good job of creating one of those. The planet of Felion is very atmospheric and also sets the setting of the episode very well, and also the characters that you meet along the way are very believable. The War Valeyard, written by John Dorney. The War Valeyard is without a doubt the attention grabber of the set. However, it is important that Big Finish didn't just rehash the character as previously seen within Trial of a Time Lord. It's fair to say that this Valeyard has been altered by the events of the war, leading to a different take on the character. Originally, I was concerned that this episode was going to be a rehashed War Master adventure, just without Jacoby, but thankfully I was proven wrong. The War Valeyard is one of those stories where I didn't really quite know what to expect, because I didn't read the description when going into this box set. I didn't really know what they were going to do with Michael Jason, and I didn't really know how he was going to react with the 8th Doctor, because he's a very different incarnation to Colin Baker, and of course the Valeyard and Colin very unusually, or the Valeyard and the 6th Doctor even, are very similar. Both of their characters have a very broad spectrum when it comes to vocabulary, and in personality they are very similar. It's just the Valeyard is the evil version of the 6th Doctor, really, more than any other Doctor, and I was curious to see how that would work with Paul McGann. But also at the same time, there is those risks of having, you don't want to do a Valeyard that is the polar opposite of what you've seen within Trial of a Time Lord, because then you will be edging towards the War Doctor series being very similar to that. And equally, you don't want to have a Renegade Time Lord story where you've just got an all-bad Doctor going off into the Time War and facing the Daleks, because then that would basically just be a rip-off of the War Master series. Instead, John Dorney kind of settles on a midpoint in a way, in more ways than one. You get to see the Valeyard affected directly by the Time War in a way that I wasn't necessarily expecting. The 8th Doctor and Bliss kind of take a little bit of a back seat within this story, and you get to see Michael Jason excellently perform as the Valeyard in many different forms and iterations of his character. You get to see a slightly softer side of him, but also for fans of the more evil variation of his character, there's some brilliant flashbacks to his older evil self as well, which is incredibly cool. And of course, Michael Jason's laugh alone is enough to keep you on the edge of your seat. This story did remind me very much of the Doom Coalition formula, which isn't really a surprise considering that John Dorney did have quite a few episodes within that series, because this episode in itself is constantly always off doing something. It's got so many different ideas, and all the different scenes are hopping between each other with the different characters, and it is constantly extremely busy. And sometimes I do think with episodes like this, it just needs to slow down a little bit, take time to breathe, and actually develop your characters a little bit further. And at points, this story did maybe need that, I think. I think that Michael Jason does good with what he's got, which is a lot of diversity within his personality and kind of a character profile of the Valeyard as a whole. I think that, as I say, we get to see different variations of him, but also at the same time, I arguably would have liked to see less Paul McGann and less Bliss, because, to be blunt, we've had 3 whole episodes of them already. I want to have an episode solely focused around the Valeyard, dedicate more scenes to him, and more the better. It would have been cool to maybe even have the first ever kind of Time War style Doctor-like story within the 8th Doctor series, where it's the Valeyard being the Doctor for that episode, and you don't even have any mention to the Doctor at all. I think that you could have a darker version of the theme, or an even darker version of the Time War one that we've already got, and I think that that would be a rather interesting concept. We do also get to see a little bit more Tamazin as well in this story within the early half of the episode, when she's kind of setting out what is going on and why the Valeyard is back, and the 8th Doctor then goes off on his own little mission with Bliss. I imagine that probably Major Tamazin was standing in there for, of course, the late Jacqueline Pierce, who did of course play Cardinal Elistra. Of course, she's now no longer with us, therefore they kind of need to avoid using her, which is an unfortunate thing. However, of course, can't be helped. At least we have so many episodes with her, with the War Doctor. And for those of you that are fans of Dalek battle sequences and explosions and all things going wrong, then this story is basically once again your traditional Time War formula. You have this planet ripped apart by the war, you have the Daleks exterminating absolutely everywhere, with some brilliant interactions between the Valeyard, of him pointing his sonic screwdriver, which was just lovely and amazing. I think that Michael once again had some stellar performances within that. However, at the same time, we do also have some of those other themes in there as well, including weaponry that is being used and the threat of it being used by the Daleks that could potentially wipe out the Time Lords. So it is very much your traditional Time War story that we got to see a lot of within especially the Time War 1 box set within the 8th Doctor series. So overall for Doctor Who Big Finish, the 8th Doctor Time War Series 3 starring Paul McGann, I think that once again this series has certainly shown a lot of potential, and I do certainly credit this box set for going off and doing unique and different things, something of which that yes, the previous box sets have done, especially within State of Bliss and the Famished Lands, and I think that this series just has something about it that has more identity compared to that of the previous series. As I mentioned at the very start of this review also, if you are intending on going on to listen to Time War 3 very soon, I certainly recommend going back and listening to Time War Series 1 and Time War Series 2 in order to get and remind yourself of that background and the different things that have gone on and the events within the different series, just to remind yourself of the relationships between the different characters, because I certainly found that very beneficial when going into this series. And additionally, something that I also kind of realised about the 8th Doctor Time War series that I necessarily wouldn't have if I didn't go on and re-listen to the previous box sets, is that the 8th Doctor Time War series is in fact a good potential jumping on point for new series fans who wish to experience more 8th Doctor adventures, because as plot arcs go, the Time War series is fairly relaxed and has lots of standalone adventures compared to that of Dark Eyes, Doom Coalition and Ravenous that is pretty much one big intertwined story with very rare individual episodes here and there. So what did you think of Time War 3? If you have listened to this box set, why not leave your mini reviews in the comment section below? And naturally, if you have any questions about this box set, please do feel free to also leave them in the comments below, and I will of course respond to them at some point in the near future. As always, the next 8th Doctor Time War series review will in fact be in 2020, around a year's time when of course the next and 4th box set from this series is released. However, stay tuned on the Host Productions for more Doctor Who content every single week, and of course brand new Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama reviews every single month. And of course on that note, I will see you all next time. Bye for now.